Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I am your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 325. Oh my goodness, I can't believe we're at episode 325. Do you know that most people that start a podcast don't get past 10 episodes? And I've done 325. So not only am I super proud of myself, I'm really excited to have this chance to build this community. And whether this is your first episode that you've ever listened to in your life, or you've been a longtime listener, or maybe you listen every once in a while, I want to thank you so much for pressing play. So here's the thing. Today is the day after Thanksgiving. And truth be told, I'm a little bit off my game, not because of any particular reason other than my schedule over the past 48 hours has been really different than usual. So if you're listening to this and you're in the United States and you celebrate Thanksgiving, you probably can relate to the idea that yesterday was, just a different sort of day full of eating and spending time with friends and family, hopefully, and having a really good time. And I definitely had that. In fact, this year in particular, this Thanksgiving, I was really grateful, more than usual, because my boyfriend, Ben, my boyfriend of 15 years, we've been together. This is his first Thanksgiving in a year and a half that he's been cured of cancer and fully able to eat. If you listen to the show, you know that about a year ago, Ben was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. And even though the treatment was gut-wrenching and really difficult, the scans that we did after the chemo and radiation were clear. And for the most part, he was healed of the cancer, but the impact of the treatment on his esophagus was so significant that for many, many months, he still couldn't eat. And, when you can't eat, not only is it really hard to get nutrition in your body, other than just drinking nutritional drinks, but your whole mental status changes and your will to do things changes and your whole attitude changes. And he is such a trooper and such a fighter. And he was doing his best, although he was definitely getting super frustrated. So over the past several months, he's been improving and improving and improving. And about a month ago, we took our trip to Paris and he was able to eat everything. And that was really the beginning of just fully engaging in eating again and full nutrition. And so this Thanksgiving was the first time in a year he was able to enjoy Thanksgiving. So not only am I grateful for that, but really grateful that the treatment worked and that he is on the way to just greater health and healing. So there's that. And, I hope that if you celebrate Thanksgiving, you're here in the United States, I hope you had a really good day. So what I wanted to do today is I wanted to first focus on what you're going to get out of today's episode. Today's episode, I'll be truthful with you, is going to be a little bit shorter than usual, but I wanted to try to pack it in with some really useful things. So what you're going to get out of today's episode, if you stick with me till the end, is you're going to learn how to share anatomy in your cues in a way that's really easy for you to do and really easy for your students to understand. But before we get into that lesson, I wanted to ask you some questions. Now, I am recording this on November 29th, 2024, and this will go live on December 2nd, 2024. So I'm recording it towards the end of the year. But because my episodes are always live and you can always listen to any episode, you might be listening to this at a different time of the year. Maybe you're listening to it in 2025. So these questions I'm going to ask, although my motivation is because I'm heading into a new year of recording shows, you can give me feedback to these questions any time of year. But if you are listening to this in the month of November or December 2024, you wouldn't be listening to it in November because it doesn't go live until December. So if you're listening to it in the month of December 2024, I really would love to hear from you because your answers will guide where the show goes in 2024. And if you're listening to this in the early part of 2024, definitely get back to me and I'm going to tell you how, because I want to hear from you so that you can have an impact on the direction of the show. And the whole idea is to get your feedback so that I can respond by sharing more of what you want, so that this podcast more and more becomes your go-to place for all things yoga teaching and all things around helping you become the yoga teacher you dream of being. So I'm going to start out by just asking you a few questions. And because I know you're most likely listening on your phone, all you need to do to send me your answer is simply go to my Instagram, Bare Bones Yoga, and send me a DM. You're already on your phone. If your phone is like mine, you can actually keep listening to the audio of this episode while you're on my Instagram sending me a DM. Now, if you're watching this episode here on YouTube and you're watching it on your laptop or desktop computer, you can just reply with a comment right to this video. So either way, you've got a really easy way to answer these questions. If you take 2-3 seconds to respond to these questions, you will have an impact on the direction of this show, just like I said a moment ago. So I'd really love to hear from you so that it benefits you and you'll even enjoy the show more in the coming months. So the first question is sort of an obvious one, but I bet the host of a podcast has never actually asked you this before. And the question is, what topics do you want to hear more of? I'm going to leave it open-ended, although I can give you some ideas. Do you want more on cueing, more on sequencing, more on anatomy, more on building a sequence with a peak pose, more on sharing anatomy in your cues? Do you want more mindset? Do you want more how to be more confident? Do you want more habits of confident yoga teachers that you can build into your day so that you feel confident when you're teaching your classes? What do you want more of? Send me a DM. The next question is, do you want more solo episodes or do you want more interviews? That's a pretty easy one. Let me know. The next question is, what kind of interviews are you looking for? What kinds of people, specific people? Let me know. The next question is, do you want longer episodes, 45 minutes or more? Or do you want shorter episodes, 20 minutes or less? Or do you want a blend or something different? Let me know. The next question is, do you want more interviews with yoga teachers? So that's a specific type of interview. Do you want more interviews with yoga teachers? Let me know that. The next question is, this is actually the last question, would you like to hear actual coaching calls between me and a yoga teacher where I help a yoga teacher solve a problem? And if the answer to that is yes, would you like to be one of the teachers on an interview call like this? I shouldn't call it an interview call. It's really a coaching call. Now, keep in mind, I do coaching calls like this in my program. So if you were to enroll in my program, part of the benefit that you would get is you would get one-on-one time with me where we would work on particular problems you're having as a teacher. Now, of course, my program has a specific format to it, so there's certain things that I'd be teaching you. And at the same time, you'd also be coming to these calls with the specific challenges you're having, and I would help you fix those problems. So this is an opportunity for you for free to get one-on-one coaching with me so that you can leave this experience with an answer to your question, with a solution to your problem, with something to experiment with. And think about all the yoga teachers that listen to it and how much help you could be to them simply by saying that you're willing to be on one of these coaching calls with me. Now, here's the thing. Nobody needs to know who you are. We can do it in audio only, and I don't need to share anything about you in terms of your name or where you live or any specifics, unless you want to share that information. So if you'd be willing to do it, but you don't want anybody to know who you are and you want to remain anonymous, that's absolutely a format that we can use. So if you are interested in being on the show in a coaching call and getting free coaching from me, send me a DM and let me know. So those are the questions I have for you. And again, you can DM me on Instagram at Bare Bones Yoga. Now, if you don't have Instagram, you can just send me an email at karen@barebonesyoga.com. So let's go into the lesson for today. So the lesson for today is how to share anatomy in your yoga cues. And this is something that I do get asked a lot. And I'm going to preface this by saying I'm really sort of jumping ahead to the good part. And by that, I mean, whenever I work with a teacher one-on-one in my program, they always want to have this conversation first, because this is the sort of thing that yoga teachers are dying to learn. How can I understand anatomy and how can I share it in my cues? But it's really difficult for me to share that with a teacher until I'm sure they actually understand anatomy. And that's why the first part of my program is to walk you through 10 easy steps to understanding anatomy. However, because I know, and I've met a lot of teachers who have enrolled in my program who do want to know how to do this, I fast forward to the good part and I share with them the lesson I'm going to share with you here. And then we go back and we fill in the gaps around anatomy. Now, you're just listening to this episode here. You're not working with me inside my program, unless, of course, you were to enroll and you get full support. So for this episode, I don't know how much you know about anatomy. So the information I share with you here, I'm going to share it without knowing where you're at with respect to your understanding of anatomy. So you may listen to this and it may trigger you. It may make you feel like, oh man, whatever she's saying here, I wish I understood it and I don't. And you may start to dig your heels into a story that you have about yourself. This just proves that I can't learn anatomy. Oh my God, she's talking over my head. This just proves what I already believe, which is I can't understand anatomy. And I want to speak to this right now because the bottom line is that's just a story. I can teach anybody anatomy. And the reason I can say that in such a forthright way and with such conviction is because I've done it hundreds of times. I have a proven method and I've proved that it works. And if you don't believe me, you can just take a look at the homepage of my website, barebonesyoga.com, and read the reviews of the teachers who have enrolled in my program. These are all teachers who, maybe like you, didn't believe that they could understand anatomy. And because they went through my step-by-step process, they disproved that belief. And I don't need to tell you, although maybe I do, how invigorating, how exciting, how empowering it feels when you, as a yoga teacher, finally understand anatomy. So with that, I'm going to dive into this quick lesson. And please, if you start to hear words and concepts that you don't understand, instead of going into a negative spiral, just say to yourself, oh my God, this sounds so cool. I can't wait to find out more. And simply send me a DM on Instagram and let me know you'd like to find out more about how you can fill in that learning gap you have around anatomy. So here's the thing. I've taught this lesson in, not this particular lesson, but the general lesson on my cueing methodology in prior episodes. And I want to start out just reiterating that. There are 4 types of yoga cues. And if you're watching this episode on YouTube, you see I'm showing the number 4. But of course, my episodes now are both regular audio as well as on my YouTube channel. So it works both ways. But if you are watching, I want these 4 fingers up, right? So the 4 types of yoga cues are action, alignment, anatomy, and somatic. And so today what we're going to do is talk about an anatomy-based cue and how you share it. The way you share an anatomy-based cue so that your students can understand it is to get them into the pose first using action cues, and then share with them some aspect of the anatomy of the pose, specifically naming a muscle that's concentrically contracting in one particular part of the pose. That's the framework, the easy framework you can use to share anatomy in your cues. I love when things rhyme. So again, I'll reiterate this. You can share action cues, 3 or 4, designed to get the students into the posture. And then speak to a muscle concentrically contracting in the pose that is part of the yoga posture. Now, notice I said concentrically contracting, and notice I said one muscle. This is so important so that you don't overwhelm your students. So number 1, speaking to a muscle that's concentrically contracting means you have a much better shot at having the student be able to connect their somatic sensation level to the actual muscle that's at play here. And I'm going to give you an example to demonstrate what I just shared. So concentrically contracting muscle in the pose. So here's how this would work. Let's say, for instance, you're teaching your students Warrior 1. And using my format here, what you're doing is sharing 3 action cues, maybe 4, to get them into the pose. So you might say from downward facing dog, step your right foot forward, drop your back heel down, reach your arms up to the sky. So those are 3 action cues that get the students into the pose. Now you want to share an anatomy-based cue that speaks to a muscle concentrically contracting in Warrior 1. So you've got a number of choices here. There are a number of joint actions in Warrior 1. Therefore, there are a number of muscles concentrically contracting in Warrior 1 to create those joint actions. So let's say, for instance, you want to speak to the muscle creating knee extension. That muscle is the quadriceps. So you might say, squeeze the muscle of your back thigh, engage your quadriceps to straighten your knee. Let's say you want to help your students level the pelvis instead of having an anterior tip. You could say, draw your belly button into your spine to contract your rectus abdominis and help level your pelvis. Okay, so those are 2 examples of speaking to muscles concentrically contracting in Warrior 1 once you get them into the pose by giving them 3 action cues. So let's do another example. Let's say you're teaching eagle from standing. You could say, bend your knees and drop your hips, wrap your right leg over the left. So those are 3 action cues to get the students into the pose. Oh, and then you would say, wrap the right arm under the left. So that gets the students in the pose. Now you could say, hug your legs into the inner line to engage the adductor muscles, or squeeze the inner thighs together to engage the muscles that line the inner thighs. So you decide how much detail you want to share. Maybe you want to share the name of the muscle. Maybe you just want to share the action of the muscle. Remember the concentric action. So you decide. This is completely predicated on the idea that you know what you're talking about. Matter of fact, don't take the cues I'm sharing here as examples unless you know what you're talking about. If you're just going to take what I just said and use it in your class and be a repeater, don't do that, because there'll be no confidence in that. You'll just be repeating stuff. This is a completely different direction than I want for you to go. What I want for you to go is in a direction where you're speaking from what you know. Because when you speak from what you know, your confidence grows. And that gets to what I shared at the beginning of this lesson, which had to do with how well you understand anatomy. And the offer to you to get in touch with me by sending me a DM on Instagram if you know that you don't know anatomy. Let's fill in that learning gap, and then you can take not only the lesson that I'm presenting here, but all of what you'll learn with me in my program and really get out there and share this stuff with confidence. But of course, I wanted to give you this episode. I mean, my podcast here is free. Anybody can listen to it because I want to give you an idea of what's possible, especially around this idea of sharing anatomy in your cues, because this is a topic that so many yoga teachers tell me they don't know how to do it. Or they go into class and they feel like they're saying so many different words, they feel like they're overwhelming their students. So this is why I wanted to pull back the curtain and give you a sneak peek on what's possible for you when you truly understand anatomy with regard to sharing anatomy in your cues. So let's do another example. Let's say you're teaching triangle pose. Let's say you're teaching it from downward facing dog. So let's start out, we're using the same framework. Let's teach the action cues. So you could say from downward facing dog, step your right foot forward, straighten your leg, straighten both legs, reach your right arm out and tip it down to your front leg, left arm to the sky. So what I just shared with you isn't exactly what I would say, but just for purposes here, that was more like 5 cues. But let's just go with that. It gets them into the pose. And please notice, I'm only using short phrases. This is so important. Once you get more experienced, you can go out there and use conversational phrasing in your classes. I would highly encourage you, especially if you're learning a comfortable way, a confident way for yourself to share cues, to stick with short action phrases over conversational cueing. Because conversational cueing, which is like having a conversation, can overwhelm your students because it can be the kind of thing where you're not exactly sure what to say, so you end up oversharing. When you go in and share short, actionable phrases, it's really easy for your students to understand what you want them to do. So now we've gotten them into triangle. They have the right foot forward, the left arm's reaching up to the sky, the right hand is down on the block or on the leg. So now the anatomy-based cue you can share speaks to the external rotators of the right hip, because the right hip is in flexion and external rotation. So what you could say is slightly bend the front knee and tuck the right sitting bone under. Roll the front inner thigh out to the outer walls. This is a complex cue. This absolutely requires you know what the hell you're talking about. This is not the kind of cue I want you to go out there and repeat unless you know what muscles are we talking about here. We're talking about external rotators. External rotators of the hip are on the posterior hip. They're muscles like the gemelles, the obturators, quadratus femoris, and piriformis. These muscles create that external rotation in triangle. And a way to facilitate external rotation in triangle is to create a little bend in the front leg so that there's more mobility at that front hip. And when you speak to the right sitting bone and tucking it under, you're creating that external rotation in the front hip. And this is something your students very clearly will feel. And I can't emphasize this enough. The muscle you speak to in your cue, it's helpful if the muscle is one that has a strong somatic sensation associated with its concentric contraction, with its activation. It's similar to, and this is not a yoga cue, but you can even experiment with this now. If I ask you to take your arm and hang it by your side, and then flex your elbow, bend your elbow, and make your bicep engage. So just like Popeye, the cartoon character. And if you're watching me here on YouTube, you can see what I'm doing. If you're listening, you have an idea of what I'm doing from the verbal cues I just gave you. When you ask your students to bend the arm and make your bicep engage, this is something that they can definitely feel. It has a very specific somatic sensation. This is the type of muscle you want to speak to in the pose. Every single yoga pose has lots of different muscles at work, creating lots of different joint actions. But some of them don't have as strong a somatic sensation as other ones. For example, any posture where your shoulders are in flexion. When you ask your students, reach your arms up to the sky, let's say in Warrior One, even though the pectoralis major and the pectoralis minor are creating that shoulder flexion, it'd be difficult to say, reach your arms up to the sky, now engage your pectoralis major and minor. They are already doing the activation of those two muscles simply by reaching the arms up in the air. It's hard for them to further engage the pecs and make that somatic sensation appear. However, if they were bench pressing and laying prone on a bench and pressing the bar with 100 pounds up in the air, and you said, squeeze your pecs as you lift the bar, you can be damn sure they're going to feel their pecs engaged there because their postural relationship to gravity is different. We've added the resistance of 100 pounds. So they're going to be able to feel their pecs engage. Matter of fact, if you do a lot of bench pressing, you'll probably have sore pecs for a couple of days. But it's different when we're working in concert with gravity in a standing position and we're reaching the arms up to the sky. So these are different examples of how you can share anatomy in your cues. And I want you to remember the simple format: 3 to 4 action cues, followed by an anatomy cue that speaks to a muscle concentrically contracting in the pose, specifically a muscle where the concentric contraction has a strong somatic sensation associated with it, so that when you share the anatomy cue, the student will really feel it. They'll feel it happening in their body. They'll feel the impact of that muscle acting upon that joint. And in fact, for many of your students, the reason this can be so powerful is because they're already feeling the muscles engage, but they often don't know what muscles are creating those sensations. So you're going to help them put a name to the sensation. And this can be a big reveal for many of your students. So that's the lesson I wanted to share today. Like I said, this is a shorter than normal episode, but hey, still packed with value. So the action to try, I've been adding this in the last number of episodes so that you have a takeaway from an episode with something you can experiment with in your classes, all in service to helping you build your confidence and skill as a teacher. So the action step to try when you go into your next class is to pick one pose, one anatomy-based cue that you can share based on the format I just shared with you below. But the caveat is it must be an anatomy-based cue where you truly understand the anatomy associated with it, rather than simply repeating something I shared here in this episode. So I'll leave that to you to experiment with. If you want help, just send me a DM on Instagram, mention this episode, and I'm happy to help. Now, the next thing I wanted to add is something I haven't been speaking to recently, but I wanted to remind you that this is an option. At the end of each episode, when you're done listening, you can go to the show notes and there will be a link to a download. That's a free download you can get. And I'll be including from week to week different downloads so you can create a personal library of downloads, a resource of sorts covering different topics, and you can learn different things in addition to what you're learning here in the episode. So what I'm going to include in the show notes for this episode is my 10-step process for learning anatomy. This is the exact blueprint I use when I teach teachers in my signature program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program. And I'm not going to gatekeep what the step-by-step process is. So all you need to do to discover what this amazing step-by-step easy process is to learn anatomy is simply go to the show notes of this episode, which you can do by just clicking the link right in the episode itself on your phone as you're listening, and download the free PDF on the 10 key steps to understanding anatomy. That link will be there for you. Now, the last thing I want to share, there's actually two final things. Number one, I would love for you, if you liked this episode and if you like the show, to take maybe a minute or two and leave a review on iTunes. If you're listening on iTunes and you leave a review, I'll actually send you a free gift. So leave a review, send me a DM, let me know the review is there, and I'll send you a free gift. It'll be a surprise. And then the last thing is I want to give you an offer, an opportunity that's completely free. Based on what we just discussed, this how to share anatomy in your cues, if you listen and you're dying to learn more about anatomy and you're just not sure how, let's say you even download my 10 key steps to understanding anatomy download that I just mentioned, but you're still looking for a little more help or even a lot more help. Maybe you're even interested in enrolling in my program, but you're not sure that you're ready to take that next step, but you have immediate right now questions about anatomy. I'm offering you a free one-on-one coaching call where we can go over the questions that you have about anatomy and I can get you started. So to set that up, all you need to do is send me a DM on Instagram and let me know you listened to this episode 325 and you'd like to set up your free anatomy work session. And I'll set that up with you. Totally free. It's up to 60 minutes and we'll get you started. We'll get your question answered and get you starting to build your confidence around sharing anatomy with your class. So with that, we're going to end this episode. I thank you so much for listening. I thank you if you're watching here on YouTube, and I look forward to talking to you in the next episode of Conversations for Yoga Teachers. Namaste.